April 25th, 2026. Well, we really have a spectacular development this week, I think, and that is the revelation that the Southern Poverty Law Center, a noted anti prejudice, pro civil rights organization, in fact, was funneling groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other supposed right wing hate groups and so forth. Although all the groups, I say supposed is they're not all. I think that include TPUSA was one of the ones they weren't funding it, but they were definitely criticizing it. So in other words, but the fact that they were actually funding these groups like the Ku Klux Klan and other in order not just to get inside, but apparently they really were operating in a way which seems like there wasn't enough actual organized bigotry going on to really support their activities and support their cause. So they needed to generate some in order to in order to maintain the fictions that they needed to maintain, that the country itself was fundamentally racist. And I think that, and going after groups like TPUSA as well, not that they infiltrated or funded that in any way, but that they were criticizing it. And of course, we all know that this led to an assassination here, maybe. I mean, because these people spread this kind of counter hate, which itself is another form of hate. And of course, occasionally radical leftists who tend to be more unstable for the most part than most conservatives sometimes act on this. So anyhow, I just thought this is a big, and of course this has actually led to an Justice Department investigation. They've actually got an indictment on this. And so this looks very interesting development. And I think we'll have to, see where it goes. However, I mean, there will be a criminal case. I know the Democrats are really upset and raising hell about this. But remember that they had the same information during the Biden years, and they basically dropped the issue and failed to pursue it. And now, of course, under the Trump administration, it is being pursued. And, so this will be an interesting development. And as I understand now, the NAACP has come out in support of the Southern Poverty Law Center, which leads one to wonder maybe they've been engaged in similar activities. We don't know. There's a whole history here, and I think that something, needs to be brought up. I will, but if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and click the bell for notifications, or you can follow me on Rumble when I post there as well. Yeah, so particularly, the other aspect of this, going back a few years, the famous Charlottesville incident, which I think occurred early 2017, right after I think Trump took office, if I remember correctly. And this was a major propaganda push for the Democrats. Even as Biden was using it 4 years later, and basically trying to misconstrue what Trump had said about it. But now you've got a situation where, there was this so-called Unite the Right rally, which apparently the individual was primarily behind it, was also one of these guys, from what I understand. I know that his background had previously been leftist before he supposedly turned right, and I remember him scurrying away at a would-be press interview after all the trouble had occurred. But they created a major confrontation between both groups in Charlottesville, which of course one guy driving around a car, I think, kind of freaked out and ran over some people and eventually got charged with murder, went to prison. But the point I'm making is that the whole thing was kind of a setup situation designed to actually damage the conservative movement. But in reality, and these dopey right wing, what do you want to call them, groups, were fools enough to fall for this stunt too, which doesn't mean they're the brightest tools in the shed either. You know what I mean? And so anyhow, I just thought that's an interesting development. We'll see how the prosecution goes. What's been noted is that they've been shaking down all sorts of major corporations to give money to them for the supposedly worthwhile cause. You see, while the money has been going in a different direction. And I think that's the basis of prosecution, is that they were using it for purposes not just to infiltrate, but also to actually fund some of these groups in order to make them more viable. If you remember a few years back to that tragic church shooting where the 8 people were killed by that crazy guy, and remember his whole motivation was he couldn't find a group to join. And so he considered himself a lone wolf because he didn't have a quote hate group unquote to join, right? No clan group or something he could find. So you see that these things are not that numerous or that obvious or that prominent anymore. They've kind of it's kind of, and a lot of them I think have other, it's a bunch of screwballs anyhow. They have no significant political impact, I think, and and every time these guys do try to do anything, it only backfires on anything that's even close to what they might be for. So they're not a big political threat, but the groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, they need to keep up this image that in order to motivate people in minority groups to feel like they're extra oppressed and they need to support the Democrat Party to save them from all this stuff. But of course, what it really is it just basically puts them in cities with high crime rates and gets a lot of their people killed by street gangs that they're unwilling to actually suppress sufficiently because they feel sympathetic to the street gang members or whatever. And so that's the kind of thing you've got with the Democrat Party, which is one of the reasons why I continually rail against it as being one of the most negative things in the country anymore. At one time, the Democrat Party years ago was just one of the two parties, and it sort of represented things like organized laborers and let's say the working class person, maybe the lower middle class person to some degree, against big business, and that maybe it fought for higher wages and better workplace safety and things of that sort. But it's turned into something completely different, particularly in the last 20 years. I think if you go back as far as maybe Bill Clinton, it was still along the lines of the original thing, but that's 25 years ago now. So 26. So you see what I mean? But it's really evolved into something totally different now. And so I think, interested to see where this goes, but I think it's something to pay attention to. So at any rate, moving on, I guess that we're still waiting to see what happens on the war with Iran. That's got all the sort of certain podcasters and stuff all upset. Tucker Carlson's now pleading he's sorry he supported Trump and all that sort of thing. But at any rate, we'll see where this all goes. I think that the problem is going to be, can the Iranians get themselves organized enough to make a logical deal to get out of the mess we're in right now? And to some degree, can the Trump administration, can they get themselves together enough to figure out what they need to do? I'm still skeptical about this whole thing about getting this uranium hexafluoride gas, not dust, out of the ground and somehow getting it back into our custody or maybe the International Nuclear Regulatory Agency or something like that, so that it would be under safer hands. But this is going to require something that's fairly difficult, as I've been pointing out. So anyhow, we'll have to see how that one goes. Another issue here is that, of course, we are trying to hunt down the tankers that have left the Persian Gulf and are heading off to, I guess, other countries, Pakistan, maybe India, particularly China, and and we've actually commandeered a couple of those on the high seas, I believe, out in the Indian Ocean. Of course, the U.S. Navy's presence in the Indian Ocean is a little bit thin. It's there. And probably the Chinese Navy is a little bit thin in that area too. But when you get toward the South China Sea, and as they get closer to China, there's a fairly significant Chinese naval presence in the area. And it'll be interesting to see whether the Chinese actually start escorting these tankers home and maybe expand their reach to try to prevent us from grabbing many more of them, or will they just stand down and stay out of the way? That is a little unclear. I mean, what will happen on that? And that's a potential flashpoint, which might or might not happen. Remember, our aircraft carriers are pretty much all in the Persian Gulf now, and that's the real make weight that would give us dominance. Without those present, both sides have, cruisers and destroyers and submarines. So, and that could, have a different, impact. We'll see. As it is, it looks like the blockade is working pretty good, and as it turns out, it's a better idea than the original one of taking Karg Island, I'll have to admit, because we can do this with essentially no casualties or maybe very little if something does go wrong. Whereas going on to Karg Island, I think you would have some notable casualties beyond the 13 or 14 we've had so far terms of fatalities if we did that. And so I think this accomplishes basically the same goal without the losses, and the theory being that at some point the Iranians will no longer have storage for the oil they're producing. If they can't ship it out, they'll have to shut down their oil production, which is something they probably don't want to do because it gets a little more difficult, as I understand, to restart it. And they've forced the shutdown of various oil and natural gas production on the other side of the Persian Gulf, So, and the Chinese at some point are going to have to get, I think, a little concerned about this whole issue. And we'll see whether the saner heads prevail in Iran or not. Just wait to see what happens on that one. So, and on another issue, I guess we're finally going to get a new Fed chairman through. So, since the administration finally got a little bit of sanity and decided to drop the charges against Jay Powell, the much hated Fed chairman by Trump, in order to get his Fed chairman actually on the job, which is what he should be most focused on, rather than a vendetta against the outgoing one. I guess because he didn't lower interest rates when Trump won, and he raised them probably when at any rate. I think that feud may be over with soon, and we can get on to it. The Inspector General, I guess, is going to continue to look into whether there's any real malfeasance in the construction project in question. I think a lot of it is that Trump, in addition to wanting to pressure Jay Powell into doing what he wanted, which didn't really work, was also really had profound disagreements on what sort of building they should be working for. He thought the old one was good, and with a little refurbishment, it would do just fine, which might be the case. I think he's not a big fan of some of the more modern government architecture. Anyway, so that'll be it for this time. As always, I'll be posting this on YouTube and Rumble, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below. So all for now.